All right, so picture this. You're on a flight, just moments away from landing. The trip has been totally smooth, you're peeking out the window, you're all set for touchdown.
You can feel that gentle descent, you see the runway lights getting closer and closer, and then bam! The engines suddenly roar to life, louder than they've been the whole flight. Instead of landing, you get pushed back into your seat as the plane climbs, and climbs hard, right back up into the sky. It's startling, right? Maybe even a little scary.
Well, what you've just been through is something called a go-around. And here's the thing you need to know. Far from being an emergency, it's actually one of the most important safety moves a pilot has in their toolkit.
Now I get it, your first reaction, and just about every passenger's first reaction, is that something must have gone terribly wrong. But today, we're going to flip that idea completely on its head. A go-around isn't about a problem, it's about pure, professional, calculated expertise.
You know, this quote really says it all. A pilot who decides to go around is a pilot who is putting your safety above absolutely everything else. It is not a sign they messed up, it's a sign of excellent judgment.
So what's the official definition? Well, a go-around is a safe, totally routine, and constantly practiced maneuver. It's simply the pilot's way of saying, you know what, this landing approach isn't 100% perfect, so we're going to loop around and do it again.
Honestly, the best way to think of it is as aviation's ultimate do-over. A car can't just undo a bad turn, but a plane? As long as there's fuel in the tanks, pilots can have another go. It's an incredible safety advantage.
So, why would a pilot choose this do-over? Well, the reasons are almost never as dramatic as you might think. They're usually logical, pretty straightforward, and all about keeping a huge margin of safety.
The most common reason, by a long shot, is something pilots call an unstabilized approach. Now that sounds technical and maybe a little worrying, but it's really not an emergency. It just means the plane isn't meeting a super strict set of criteria for a perfect landing.
You see, pilots work with this concept called the gate. Think of it as an invisible checkpoint in the sky, usually at about 1,000 feet. By the time the plane passes through that gate, it has to be perfectly configured, on the right path, at the right speed, with the flaps and gear down. If even one of those little things is slightly off, nope. The only correct call is to go around.
And, beyond a stabilized approach, there are a bunch of other common sense reasons. Maybe the plane that landed just before you hasn't cleared the runway yet. Or there could be a sudden gust of wind, what they call wind shear. Maybe the fog rolls in and visibility just drops. Sometimes it's as simple as air traffic control just telling them to do it. In every single one of these cases, the go-around is the safest play.
Okay, so the pilot makes the call. What happens next? Well, they're not just winging it. It's not panic mode. It's procedure mode. They follow a very precise, memorized checklist to execute this maneuver perfectly, every single time.
A lot of pilots use a handy little memory aid called the 5 C's. First up, cram. That just means smoothly pushing the throttles to full power. Then, climb. Pitch the nose up and get a good positive climb going. Next, clean. Bring the flaps and landing gear up to reduce drag. Then, cool. Adjust the engine settings. And finally, call. Let air traffic control know what you're doing. See, it's a drilled, systematic process.
So this whole thing is routine, but don't get me wrong, it is not simple. That pilot is actively fighting some pretty powerful aerodynamic forces that kick in the second those engines spool up.
Just think about that switch for a second. The plane goes from low power, low speed, kinda nose down, to the complete opposite. Full power, speeding up and climbing steeply. It is a massive change, and handling it requires absolute precision. Because when you slam those throttles forward at a pretty low speed, the airplane reacts in very specific, very powerful ways, and the pilot has to be ready to counteract them instantly.
There are two major forces to deal with. First, that sudden blast of air from the props pushes the tail down, which makes the nose want to pitch up, and I mean aggressively. Second, the raw power and torque of the engines at low speed creates this strong pull for the plane to turn and roll over to the left.
And this is where that incredible training kicks in. To fight those forces, the pilot has to do something that sounds totally counterintuitive. They actually have to push forward on the control stick to keep the nose from climbing too high, while at the exact same time pushing on the right rudder pedal to keep the plane flying straight. It's this complex little dance of control inputs that really shows off their skill.
All right, so let's tie all of this together. The next time you're on a plane and you experience a go-around, you'll have a completely different understanding of what's really going on in that cockpit.
And get this, it's actually wild how rare these are for any one pilot. I read about a captain with a 40-year career, and he figured he'd only done 6 or 7 of them for real in his entire life.
That's why pilots practice them over and over in the simulator, so they're ready for something that almost never happens.
So if you remember just one thing, let it be this. A go-around is not a failed landing.
In fact, it's the exact opposite. It is the successful execution of a safety-first decision. It's the pilot being proactive, being professional, and choosing to guarantee the safety of the plane and every single person on it.
So I'll just leave you with this question. The next time you feel those engines roar back to life just before the runway, are you going to think it's a failure? Or are you going to recognize it for what it truly is? The sign of an expert pilot making a successful decision to keep your flight safe.